Hey guys, welcome to the recorded session today. My name is Ryan Delaney. I'm the Chief Experience Officer and co-founder at Overdose Digital. I'm excited to present a new product that we've been working on called Krative. It's an autonomous agent that looks at governed data and creates creative assets, all powered through Looker. Now, this is more than just the product itself, I promise you. But it's more importantly talking about why governed data matters for agentic workflows. So the overall session is describing data to insight, insight to action, action to outcome. And I know that a lot of businesses these days are looking at how AI can transform their business too. I'm pretty damn stoked to say that we had the opportunity to present this at Google Next in Las Vegas, which is a very interesting sensory overload sort of place in the world. It is Google's largest event. It's where they do their biggest announcements. But what we saw was how big AI was involved in the entire event. Anthropic was like 50% there. Everyone was talking about how they're bringing AI into their day-to-days or into their businesses to drive performance, or in our case, things like new product. But the more eye-opening part of this is that everyone is now doing AI. But whether you're doing it experimental today and trying to figure out where it fits in your business, it has moved far and beyond that just due to the speed of it. It's now going into an operational phase where almost every merchant or every business should be capitalizing and utilizing it too. Now, from the data perspective, I want to really define the problem here. And this problem is where you have one business, in this case, but seven different numbers. So taking the revenue source of truth that you would typically look at, and in this case is Shopify for this demo, but it could be anything. It could be Salesforce, it could be Adobe, it could be your ERP system. Is that that system says 580 grand, but then you look at GA4, where a lot of people are doing their reporting, their analysis of the performance of their business, and that's saying 542 grand with that 7% discrepancy. Now, this is normal, don't get me wrong, there's reasons to this, things like consent modes and ad blockers, and there's certain aids that you can do to help facilitate it, like server-side tracking. But then you also have other problems there, like five channels, all claiming different credit, which is things like Meta saying from last click, no, I actually made that sale versus Google trying to say the same thing, right? And then you have that discrepancy gap in that revenue. Now, why does this matter? Is that if you have seven different numbers or seven different dashboards for each part of your business, is that people that are exploring it these days, and I've seen it firsthand where they put in whether that's spreadsheets or MCP servers into Claude, is that it seems that people seem to think that AI will fix those data discrepancies. And let me tell you, that is so wrong. It does not fix those problems. In fact, what it does is that if it sees seven different numbers, it will compound the problem every single time. So it will think it's right because it has to come up with some form of an answer. And then the more times that you kind of accept that that answer is right or become complacent to that reporting, it amplifies the gap. So it creates that your hallucinations makes the agent feel more confident with the answers going forward. So let me just frame this in a way I think it's the easiest way to frame it. If you ever write something in, say, Gemini or OpenAI or Claude, etc., and you ask it a certain question and it defines an answer for you, even if it's with your data, or trial it with your data, and then just say that it's wrong. Its response is going to be like, oh, yeah, you're right. I completely missed that. Let me reframe that for you. Here's your answer. How can you trust that? Right? Because it's always going to favor you when you say that it's wrong. And that's what we're trying to change, is that we're trying to change having a governed source of truth where your data lives. So it all lives in one place, right? It's all your metrics are defined in one place. And then every part of your business, whether that's CFOs, your marketing team, your e-commerce managers, whoever looks at data, are reading it from the exact same location where it's all architected in a way that's suited for your businesses. Right? Discrepancies don't reach the output. So what I'm saying here is governed data is no longer optional. It's actually the foundation that every agent depends on. So before I get into the cool stuff, and this is going to be demo heavy, is I just want to briefly talk about how this works for those that may be interested. So we have all your platforms. You may have Meta, Google Ads, TikTok, Shopify, Klaviyo, Digital, an ERP system, whatever it is, wherever your data lives, we are pushing all of that data, that raw data, I might add, into BigQuery, which is a data warehouse. Now, you may have a data warehouse already like Snowflake, etc., which is great. I'm glad that you're that step ahead. We can work on that too. But that is raw data, and that's just where it lives. Now, there's a couple of advantages to this, is that GA4 and even Meta and certain channels, they have expiry dates too. So typically that's a 14-month expiry date. So you can't backtrack from there. Where a data warehouse enables you to have longevity in your data for however long. Now, what does this actually start to unlock? Is it starts to unlock predictive models, right? So we can start to bring agentic workflows in there to start to predict the next step, right? Because it's got all of that data that it can actually start to rely on and model on. But that raw data is complex. That's where we bring our raw data into Looker. Now, this isn't Looker Studio, now known as Data Studio. This is the enterprise BI piece. Now, I'm going to show you dashboards today. That's not actually the power of Looker. The power of Looker is actually a thing called a semantic layer, which is, in complex terms, it cleans a lot of that data, it blends all of your data for you, and it keeps a very slimmed version where you're not looking at raw data. And actually really helps minimize those query costs when you start to bring in things like Vertex AI or any sort of agentic workflow. And what I'll be demonstrating as our agentic workflow from a data perspective is conversational analytics. So that's where you can actually ask questions about your data, or anyone can ask questions, whether that's your CFO, and you can start to blend different data sets and be curious about your data and get governed answers back, because all it's looking at is your data that's sitting in Looker. Right? It's not making up things from LLMs or anything like that. It is strictly just looking at your data. Then the final piece of this is, how do we then move that into an actual action? And that action is what we call creative, or in other terms, we call it now generative analytics. And I'll just jump straight into it. It's being able to autonomously pull through insights that's powered through Looker. So instead of you having to go through dashboards and find the problem, and in some cases miss the problem or too slow to the problem, is that we're building an agentic workflow that's going to surface this information up for you, but also define a potential solution that you can do, and then start to create assets as well to help refresh things like campaigns too. Now, it's up to you whether you want to use those assets or not, but it's a really powerful system because I'll show you how it learns through creative reporting very shortly. So let's quickly get into the nitty gritty of Looker. And again, I want to re-emphasize that I'm not here to just showcase a dashboard, because if you were to ask me, I actually think dashboards are dead. What I'm trying to show you today is that all this data lives in one centralized environment. So your revenue, first and foremost, is your source of truth. In this case, it's coming from Shopify. It's not coming from GA4, etc. We have got in channel performance is that we've got your standard metrics like ROAS. Now, I have to admit, or not to offend anyone, but ROAS in this case or my opinion, is what I call a vanity metric. And the reason for that, and whilst it still has a purpose, is that if you're looking at a campaign and maybe you're very stoked about a 7 or 10 times ROAS, which is a good metric, your C-suite or your CFO may be looking at that particular campaign and going, yo, this made me, 5% profit, right? And bottom line is that business survives on profit, and profit is extremely important. So that's where we start to blend in metrics like PROAS, which brings in certain data sets like cost of goods sold and shipping and returns and all of those different types of things to give not only you as a marketeer, if that's who I'm talking to right now, but also gives the confidence to the CFO as well, knowing that it is actually helping with the overall GP. Now, quickly, I'm going to talk about how we've grounded our agentic workflow being creative, is that we've grounded it all towards profit. And the reason for that is when it's autonomously pulling through and giving you insights, we wanted to ensure that the agent is also looking at profit. It puts it into survival mode, but also keeps the CFO absolutely stoked. Now, you can change that to be revenue chasing and ROAS chasing, especially for big sale periods like cyber weekends, etc. But it is really important that it's not just chasing for revenue, but in affecting the bottom line. I'm going to skip through some of this. I'm just going to call out some key signals and how the agent is powered through because there's a lot here. But there is this case too that, you know, we can start to bring in all your metrics from your channels, etc. But you can also bring in things like your monthly targets or business performance targets alongside of it. And why that's important is because it just gives additional context to the agent as it goes through, right? So if you're below target or above target, it now knows what to chase for. And whether that's through profitability or revenue, it could do both, right? So it could start to chase for revenue that also chases for GP. So what you see here is the channel performance. No longer, or maybe this is you, or maybe it's not, but having to look at Merchant Center to analyze your data, then having to jump on Meta to analyze your data. And it can be any sort of metric that we can pull from these channels to analyze them. All right. So they all live in the same spot and they're all governed through the source of truth of revenue coming from, in this case, Shopify. But you can drill down too. So you can see your campaign objectives and how those are performing in particular, all the way to the current campaigns that are running. But the key thing I want to call out here is not just necessarily the actual drill down, right? It's more to understand that all of it lives in the centralized ecosystem, being Looker in this case. But the key thing is the signals that we want to be pushing to our agentic workflow. So let's take change of PROAS as an example. When we see things start to take a decline or a negative impact, is that we want that to be pushing the autonomous agent to be going, yo, let's do something about this. We're starting to see a negative trend. Let's start to be reactive and proactive around this, as opposed to you having to go through dashboards or go through Merchant Center, Meta, etc., to find that it's a problem. And that could be too late, and you're actually, affecting your revenue in general. We also are tying in MMM for the marketers that are interested in this. Now, this is a bit more complex and probably requires a follow-up session on this, but it is really important that we are actually looking at what we call the GA4 attribution, which is kind of like a very microscopic look at channel attribution versus MMM, which is more of a satellite view, especially when you're looking at baseline, which is taking into account your organic, your TV ads or radio, billboard, whatever that is, direct, etc. It's all being reconciled through MMM. So that's your channel performance. Now let's get into some business performance too. So what we have here is that we actually have your category and brand if you happen to have multiple brands insights. You could break this down by regions or show, in this case, you can show all of Australia if you really wanted to as well. But what I was just wanting to pull out here is that you can look at the revenue performance, but you can also look at your GP by categories. Now, what this is going to recommend in the agentic flow is products that are going to give you the highest GP by location because we're trying to create these hyper localized campaigns. So you would see here that let's just take the category campaign is that this particular chair is the Monroe accent chair, is the most profitable product that sits in Victoria. Now you can break that further if your data was that deep. You can actually break that down to Melbourne specifically. If you happen to be an absolute giant of a company, you can break that down by suburb if that was relevant. All of that exists. And furthermore to that is that we can actually break down category performance with revenue, with your customer segment performance. So we can see that like we can blend data to be like, what is the highest profitable product, maybe by location even, that drives active new customers, which may be a low value item like a lamp as opposed to an expensive chair. Then what is the product that is driving repeat purchases too? And start to be a lot more logical in how you create campaigns, not only for uh, your channels like Meta, etc., but also for your email too. Now, this lives in Klaviyo, and your customer segments also live in Klaviyo too, which is a huge advantage of it. However, in saying that, if you don't have that at the moment, is that because we are taking customer IDs, not emails, just IDs into the data here, is that we can create custom segments too and churn rates and have all that data living within Looker. Now, this is where I see the future, and not to sound like potentially like Gary Vee or anything like that, but this is what I want everyone to understand and where we're going towards. And that's conversational analytics and why I think dashboards is a potential dying thing. Is that why go through that process when you can ask a question for that process and get quick answers too? So in this case, we just quickly asked it what was the ROAS and total spend for paid channel last month, which channel had the strongest return, and how it's justified the strongest return. And as I mentioned again, is that profit is what it sees as the strongest return, keeping it under that CFO sort of lens. And it's given us sort of a breakdown on that. It's understand that it was taken from the last month. It will give you a chart or a graph, and you can ask it for a certain graph if you really wanted to, and a full summary. You could also follow that up with to ask what action should I take, or can you recommend an action? Now that's powered through the lens of Gemini, um, but extremely helpful going forward. And what I love this or love about this in general is that it allows you to be very curious about your data, which is really critical these days to actually deep dive. If you wanted to create custom data blends and merges, it's quite complex, to be honest with you. I'm going to quickly show you how complex this is. This is called SQL, and it helps write and connect all the dots of all those separate data that lives in there, like things like Shopify order date and mixed campaigns. It's a very intense sort of system. It's over my brain. But if you were to be doing this manually, to some respect, and I know you could be doing it through Excel spreadsheets, but I still define that as manually, that takes time, which will then say, is it worthwhile exploring? But at the same time, is that if you need an expert to actually do that for you, potentially by the time you put it through a sprint or whatever that is, it may be too late and that data is completely redundant. Now let's take it to the next level, which is creative performance, which is a new thing and something that's never really been able to do prior to AI. And what we're aiming to achieve here is that we have an agent looking at the what is in the creatives and what is helping, what subjects and styles and settings are helping influence the performance of those creatives too. So it defines things like, okay, indoor plants is a good example as a certain style. That helps the performance of sales for a furniture brand. So I always try and bring in indoor plants. Maybe it brings it to life, whatever that is, and it helps merge these metrics to then define a score. We then break that out by awareness, knowing that awareness is a different type of metric and a different type of campaign. But more importantly, is that we're trying to segment this by locations. So this becomes the brain behind how our creative agent actually works. It will then go, let's just take this example where natural daylight is working really well in Melbourne, but starting to perform less in the location like Sydney. Also taking into account the seasonality change that we're moving into winter, darker months, and I feel maybe more cozier in a warm firelight, etc. Now, creative. This is the exciting project which I briefly showed you before, and I'm going to talk you through it. So I talked about how we're autonomously looking at insights in general. Now I'm just going to break down these insights for you very briefly. So we have an insight that's going, look, this is a new opportunity. We have the Mason side table is selling organically steady, I would mention, but there's zero paid activity behind it. So we have 12,400 organic product views, steady sales over the last 30 days. It's got a 71% GP associated to it. Um, and maybe there's some revenue to unlock in general. Then we have a sales fatigue and an awareness fatigue. So both campaigns are running, just different campaign objectives. Let's just talk about the sales fatigue. So our Accent Chairs campaign is dropping below the ball, especially below the benchmark that we want it to do. And what it's recommending is, okay, let's try the three most profitable chairs. Let's try a whole new creative campaign behind it. Now you would have the option to create your own campaigns as you will and be able to reference images. The last part is talking about how it's configured. Anyone that's used like Nano Banana or generative tools in the past knows that, man, it can be an absolute grind to kind of get it right. And that's because prompt languages actually need to be really clearly defined. But what we're aiming to achieve here, or what we have achieved, is being able to create a brand configuration to really define what it actually should look like. And more importantly, like negative prompts of what it shouldn't look like no cartoonish aspects too. And then what we're working towards is bringing in synthetic models too, because we all know that models are expensive and that some brands want model consistency. Now, I've clicked on the sales fatigue campaign, and this is just going through the logic of going, make sure that you look at the brand config, make sure that you're looking at the right metrics to then generate a creative brief. So this creative brief is in written format. And the reason for that is because human in loop needs to be a part of this process. You can't just let it go willy-nilly and create assets on the fly, unless you're that game to do so, to be honest with you. So it will bring through certain metrics from the current performance of that campaign, the locations. Based off the creative reporting, it will define what's working well in Melbourne, like the indoor plants that I mentioned before, versus what to avoid. We're seeing a decline of standalone product shots without any sort of human interaction working too. It'll create a creative hypothesis with some reasoning, some data reasoning behind it. And then it will define three written creative briefs. Now you can edit these creative briefs as you wish, and it will help define some certain keywords that are performing well. But we don't want to just use up model costs and stuff like that before you read the creative brief in itself. We'll generate these. So the first one is the botanic edit, and it's got the product ref. And honestly, the coolest thing is probably that your catalog images live within Krative as well, so you don't need to upload them or anything like that. And it will then create the version one of the asset. And I take this as version one is because whilst this is an indoor creative asset, like indoor plant creative asset, I should say, it's potentially taken the indoor plant a little bit too excessively. So you can go edit that and say, yo, 50% of the indoor plants would be absolutely fine. It still does what I want it to do. Um, and you can do so by clicking edit. Now we have two different other campaigns, and the reason for this is because to test what's in the creative needs to be done at volume, and it needs to test different variants of these campaigns, which is different ad sets, and create a version of the second most profitable product in this case is a couple of people enjoying, which looks like a Pinot Gris or potentially a Sav in their highly expensive apartment. And then the other variation to this is the family mode too. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and approve that one. So you can export them into different aspect ratios by different sort of mediums. You can create the exact same product by a different location. It will help bring in some top performing metrics in there too. And you can generate video as well, which takes a little bit of time. And then once a video is generated, is that you can then create your variations and sizes. Now, this is the output where we see two of the same products, but two very different style campaigns for two different locations. So this is taken into account especially the winter mode. Let's just say that they're wearing the same outfit, but it's the morning light that seems more comforting for that Melbourne audience. And then obviously the indoor plants versus the Sydney version, which is more firelight, nighttime sort of comfort in the winter period. And then the variation to the right is the Mason side table that I defined as the new opportunity with no paid spend behind it. So that's typically where creative stops or generative AI stops, and this is where it starts to learn and starts to get better over time. So we wanted to introduce creative fatigue as well, because that's the honest truth is that creatives don't have huge amount of longevity. In fact, that people's attention spans looking at creatives is extremely low as well. So being able to explore, but also being able to report on it is extremely important. It may give you metrics and an understanding about your demographics more than you could actually understand today as well. So once the creative fatigues are starting to take place again, this will start to trigger different insights and different actions, and it will learn over time. And that's about it, really, to be honest with you guys. Um, Hopefully that's nice and clear, as much as I could fit this within a tight schedule. Now you can go on our website to get more information about Krative and scan that if you really wanted to. But the key thing is that reach out to us. I'm happy to demonstrate it more tailored to your business and ask those very specific questions. Or if you're interested in MMM, happy to bring that forward as well. Hope you enjoyed it. Please don't be shy and reach out for any information you need. Thank you.